a bit more about your background and also what has really motivated what is happening in May here in New York?
Oh my gosh, so it's so fun. I grew up in San Francisco. I had a corporate fashion career here in New York for about 10 years. I ran a division at Gucci. I was a buyer at Barney's. You know, everyone's crying on the inside. It really was a triggering point for so many people. And then I moved to Los Angeles because I fell in love and I got married and I started a company. And 6 years into that, I realized I did not want to be married anymore to this person. And yet I had a company that I had founded while I was in this relationship. And so all of a sudden I went, holy shit, I'm getting a divorce. I am responsible for salaries. I am a business owner here. What am I going to do? And so I did what most of us do, and we call our girlfriends, and we're like, oh my God, like, how are you managing this? And so I sent an email out to 50 girlfriends, and I said, hey guys, I want to talk about money. Like, what are you doing with it? Where do you invest it? Like, how are you thinking about this? And 95% of them did not want to talk about it. Yeah, and I was like, shit, what am I gonna do? So I did the second thing we all do, which is go get very educated on things, right? So I started taking the venture capital courses at Columbia. I started taking all the webinars. I was like, outside of my 401k and a house, right, in real estate, what else was available to me? Because no one had told me that there were other options. And so I started down that pathway, and it started to lead me into groups of incredible women and saying, hey, I want to talk to wealth expanders, right? I'm not necessarily looking for someone to solve my problems. I don't need to be infantilized about the stock market, you know, but I want to talk to women who are doing creative and different things so I can actually take a step and say, wow, what do I want to do, right? Not what someone else wants me to do, but what do I want to do? And guess what? I like risk, but most people were telling me that women don't, right? And so I started to uncover and learn more things about myself. And so fast forward, started having these conversations. That led eventually to a podcast that I launched last year called Getting Rich Together. Kat is on the podcast. It's a great episode. It's so much fun. It's a fantastic show, and this show highlights the various stages of how women relate to their capital over their lives. And so it starts off with, what was life like for you as a child, right? What did your parents do? How did you think about money? All the way through to how did you negotiate or ever negotiate your jobs? But we draw on stories from women who have married into wealth, inherited wealth, built their businesses, had corporate careers. It doesn't really matter how it happened. What matters is that we all have a story to share. And so last summer, John and I, over the success of the podcast, it now has 1,000 5-stars on Spotify. It's won 2 national awards. Our podcast is turning 1 in about 10 days. So it's very young. But we said, holy bananas, like there is something going on here. And what do we do? And so that brings us to the summit, which is we've essentially taken the creative ways in which we know women are building wealth and putting peers, not celebrities, on stages to say, here's not what I did 30, 40 years ago, here's what I'm doing now, right? That is how we are here today. And so tonight is part of a series of events that we're calling the Catalyst Week, which is let's get women together, let's talk about money, values, let's talk about why it is today that it feels like if we don't have capital, we're not able to have the change we want in the world, and let's fucking do something about it.
All right, yeah. Love that. Also, it's speaking of catalysts, and there is definitely something in the air, right? There is this giant wealth transfer that is about to happen. So much of what you're talking about, that's just what I'm sitting here thinking about, you know, how important it is that we have this conversation now. Yeah. What's happening.
I mean, it's wild. So I'm sure you guys have all heard the stats, but $30 trillion are passing into the hands of women in the next 5 years, right? That is something that we should, off the bat, just be excited about. However, only 28% of women feel confident exercising their capital. So that's terrifying, right? It means that 72% of women are going to come into wealth. It's going to be sudden wealth. right? Which means that they're not gonna feel confident. They're gonna be with wealth managers who are gonna say, just leave your money here. Why would you take it out? Right? And so what's gonna happen, unfortunately, is money starts to come out of the economy if we are not emboldened to be able to invest in the people, businesses, and ideas that we believe in. And so the great wealth transfer is exciting, but it's also really catalyzed us to be like, we need women to feel confident because the future of our economy rests in that. The future of how we take care of our families and our communities rest in that. And so that has really enabled John and I to build out this ecosystem that is pillared around education, great networks, and access to opportunities.
Right, I love that. I also just feel like it could be such a huge missed opportunity if all of these things don't happen. You know, if there isn't this community, if there isn't this education, if we're not having these conversations, the truth is that that wealth transfer could happen, and there might be such a delay before we feel the impact because it's business as usual, like you're describing. So maybe we can get into the weeds a little bit on that. Like, how are you helping women, you know, largely the people who are inheriting all this wealth, to think differently about investing? You know, so like philanthropy, investment, so easy for women historically to donate. So difficult for women to invest in themselves and invest in others when it's uncertain, right? When it's angel, when it's venture, when it's so. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Oh, of course. You know, I actually think that most women, and you know, today the conversation overly indexes on women in venture or in the stock market right now, right? And we don't actually have a lot of conversation of gradual risk, right? Women in venture is so important because, as everybody knows, right, less than 2% of capital goes to female founders. At the same time, in order to get a woman who's maybe historically investing in the stock market to start to move the needle, incremental risk and also access to liquidity, I think, needs to be shown across a diversified portfolio. Now, you guys have all heard, I'm not a wealth manager, right? I'm a divorcee who's remarried to the love of my life and on a mission here. But when it comes to how to get women in general to really relate to how they want to invest, a big part of it is saying, well, what do I believe in?
Right.
What is important to me? And that can mean anything. I mean, everyone here tonight likely has a different idea of what their vision of the world is, right? And that should all be celebrated. We all get to sort of have our vision of the world. And what's important is we look at our money. Don't worry, I like the lights, you know. What's important is we look at sort of what's important to us, and then we start to say, how much money do I then have to be able to allocate? And so for someone that might mean, you know, I don't have excess capital to be high risk, but I can certainly move some of my savings to a community bank that's giving loans to women founders.
Yes.
Right? So I
Such
can,
a great point.
totally, or I can invest in an ETF like the WCEO that's like $30 a share, even if I can't write that big angel check.
Love that.
So I think that there are just so many different ways that we can start to incrementally move our money to the things that are important to us, that when we start to see returns and start to feel more confident, we can then start to step into these other asset classes. And the other thing is, guys, like, we don't talk about all the fun asset classes, you know, like at the summit, we talk about investing in art or investing in Broadway, right? Investing in things that are maybe just as risky as venture,
Right.
But have different timeline horizons and different liquidity events. And so money should be exciting and fun, and how we invest can be that way.
God, I love all that, and I just have to now plug a partner of the Fourth Effect, actually a startup in the Fourth Effect called Play Money. For those of you that don't know it, I would recommend doing a quick Google search and signing up and downloading it. It's totally free. It's a way that angel can be incredibly fun. So it's another example of what you're describing. It's kind of like an ETF, but for angel. So if you think about it, it's, you know, kind of swiping left and swiping right, small bets, $500. In the aggregate, angel math, you know, as an asset class, it can outperform. So if you're allocating part of your IRA, for instance, pre-tax savings, and it's a small portion overall, that's pretty risk averse, and that's a way to invest aligned with the future you want to build, which is what we're talking about.
Absolutely, and even things like women starting to realize you can use your DAF right? And start to invest out of your donor advised funds into angel investing, into startups. I mean, there are so many ways that we can move the needle. And when you think about things, and I think almost all of us here have been to some event around women's health, right? When it comes to something around women's health where we deeply need funding, right? It's going to take all of us doing things at various different levels, right? To be able to move that needle.
So true. And so many of these things are so entrenched. Like, and of course I'm a lawyer, so I'm thinking about all the regulations.
Yes.
I'm thinking about, like, historically one of the reasons why has it been so hard for people to access venture and angel, and they have to be an accredited investor. They don't necessarily know what that means. There's and there are regulations partially to protect ourselves from ourselves, but there's also regulations that perpetuate the inequity that we have, that we're trying to come out from under. So, I think complicated entrenched systems. So this is why the grassroots effort is important, top down and bottom up.
Absolutely, and I think that what's so critical here is that when we think about our capital and what we can do with it, it's something that is so personal that we actually need to be having conversations with each other. This market of women, of all of us in here, we're not being spoken to. Right, every event that we go to, right, that's usually hosted by a bank or some financial service or product, and they want us to be their clients, and there's so much transactionality around it. But where is the opportunity to sort of go and learn what's available, and then take a step back and say, okay, maybe this is for me now, and maybe I want to try this later, but let me have a larger aperture of what I can actually have exposure to. But what's interesting is it's not through social media posting. Right? It's like true change doesn't happen through saying, oh, I believe in this. Literally, it's through texting your friends and saying, I'm looking at this opportunity. I just read this thing. I'm attending this event that's going to teach me this other thing. Come with me.
Yeah, I love that. And so it brings me to the very first point that I made, connection, right? About connection, because relationships is really what you're getting at. And it's something that we realized early on at the Fourth Effect. Nobody is putting you on their board, and nobody is writing you a check if they don't know you. I swear, you can't get away from it. It would be so much easier for us if we could build some incredible piece of technology, beautiful product, perfect match. I'm gonna swipe left and swipe right. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. And so we like to say, well, we built this how a woman would build it, which is long and torturous and painful and complicated. Holistic. It's a holistic solution. Okay, who hates hearing that? Any VC ever. But it's a complicated problem. So the solution is going to be complicated. And I think there are many things that women are good at. That is one of them. One of the things. So anyway, we can understand complexity, we can suffer, and we also understand relationships.
That's right. And when it comes to how traditional deal flow happens, right, it's through relationships, right? So, when it comes to how do we start to invite people, it's really the individual onus, right? I mean, it is up to each of us to text our friend, like I did many years ago, and say, hey, like, what are you looking at, right? How can we sort of start to have these conversations? And creating that space, I think, is unique because so often we are leading with our LinkedIn profiles, right? We're leading with the fact that we're all so successful, which we all are, and we've worked our asses off to be here. But just because you run the P&L of a company like a motherfucker, it doesn't mean that your personal finances are together. And those are two very different things. And I've seen this also with a lot of founders, a lot of female founders in my previous company put everything into their companies without thinking about a real exit. Or what does it look like if 99% of the businesses do fail? What do they do next? And so when it comes to really thinking about this, I always say your first business is not your last. We have to think and plan with the long-term trajectory. Most of us in here are going to live excruciatingly long lives, science and technology is pushing it hard. So if that's the case, then we're all really young in this room, and we have a lot of planning to do. So, I think that there's a lot that's ahead of us. One of the things that I think is fascinating, we just talked about this earlier, is we all know all the pay gap stuff, right? It's like we just don't make as much as we should, 85 cents on the dollar, but we just don't talk enough about the fact that, like, if we're being taught 401ks and buying your house is the way to go, and we're making less money, but we go to the stores, and you were mentioning, Breen, pink tax, or even just paying the same amount as anyone else, right? We are not getting ahead by virtue of the way things are today. So we actually are forced to be more creative, because a 401k is just not gonna cut it.
Not this week.
That's right.
Right, and it's just making me think of this. I was just actually listening to Sarah Blakely, and she was talking. She made this point: to change the rules, you have to change the game, and that is what it's making me think of. And of course, she was talking about shapewear back when she had this idea. She just totally changed the game. She broke all the rules. She did everything she was not supposed to do, and she didn't care. And that, even though it's, it seems it's underwear, but no one was thinking about it. The system, everyone's assumptions, it just wasn't baked in. And then she redefined the rules, and that changed the game. And then now this is normal, and now we all wear Spanx.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, thank God.
Not true.
Thank God we all have access. So there's something about right timing, right? And so when it comes to, where the rules of the game are, Wendy and I were talking earlier about, she was mentioning Bitcoin, right, in 2014, and these opportunities to sort of get into the rooms early, right, and what that means. And so the way that we change the game is we get together and we say, well, what is the vision of the future I want to see? I think too often we are caught up in this world of being selfish when we should be self-interested. And this idea of self-interest to me is that, hey, if I get quiet and listen deeply, I'm going to tap into the things that really matter to me. But if I'm selfish, my eyes are open, I'm on social media, I'm going, I want Jen's shoes, I want this bag, and I don't know if I really want it, right? But I know that I see other people who have it. And so my hope is that we can all become more self-interested, right? What are the things that bring us joy? What are the causes that matter to us the most? And in doing so, right, we rewrite our own rules. Right? When we rewrite our, yeah, right.
Really hard to
it's
say.
very hard, thank you. When we do that for ourselves, we set precedent for others. Yeah. Right? When we live life by our own terms, we tell others it's okay to do the same. Right? And then people look at you and they're like, wow, I can't believe you did that. Right? And so this is important, because creating change, sometimes we think we all need to be out there protesting on the same mission. I actually believe the inner change happens through the protest against the rules of the world that we're living in that don't agree with us. Yeah. Right? We make changes with our capital, and then we see ripple effects.
Well, and also just challenging the assumptions that are all around you, because it's so easy not to do that. And I think it's so important and critical, especially
Absolutely.
For everything you're talking about.
Oh my gosh, and what's so important about this moment is that everyone here today is like feeling a little uncertain, right? And even, the economy, what's happening, no matter like what's going on, there's a sense of uncertainty. And so what John and I did recently is we sat down and we said, okay, well, what does uncertainty mean to us? Right? What does it mean to me? All the pundits are saying this and that, and everyone's coming up with a different opinion, but how do we want to think about things? Right? And so taking the decision making out of the hands of the experts, who are really just people there to execute, right? They're there to execute. They are your employees, right? The people who are there managing resources and there to help you execute on trades. But really the question is, what is important to us? And so we end up looking and going, wow, we need to look more into crypto, right? We need to think a little differently about real estate investing. So we recently looked into getting small plot of land that we thought was in like a climate resilient area, right? And we didn't do that because someone else told us to. We did it because it made us feel safe, right? And each of us has an inner locus of identity around safety, right? And if we know what's safe for us, which is different for everybody, we can then move the needle on the things that are going to help us get to our own individual goals.
No, well said. Love that. And And I'm just thinking, I'm sure in the summit you will probably go into some detail about kind of the mechanics of how these things happen or what the options are. I know you referenced alternative investments, like say in art or in productions, but does it make sense to maybe share just a little bit, like a little bit of a preview of the ways people could be thinking about wealth creation that they might not be?
Oh, of course. I mean, so I'll give you guys just like a synopsis of like what the day looks like, and you'll be like, oh yeah, like I can do that. So we have someone talking about buying cash flowing businesses. We talk a lot, yes, yeah, it's very exciting. And so, when it comes to how we look at buying businesses, and it's not just laundromats, it's, basically taking a look and saying, what are skill sets that I have innately, mostly if you're a corporate or even an existing founder, what are skill sets that I have that can really move the needle in an existing business, right? So maybe you don't have to build it from scratch, right? You can buy an asset and then run it and add the thing about yourself that makes it unique. So I think buying an existing business is a fantastic example. I also think when we think about real estate investing, we need to start opening up our eyes to, John likes to say, land is the only thing they're not making any more of, right? So it's like, what are the things, right, that we can start to get more creative with when it comes to how we're allocating those assets. Right. And then when it comes to thinking about angel investing, I think all too often we're not being educated on sizing, timing of checks, and how to really build the muscle as an angel. And so a lot of the conversations on stage are not just about successful angel investments, but also like, you gotta write a bunch of checks, right? There's a strategy to angel investing, and it's not just one or two companies, it's 10 companies, right? And it's looking and spending the time doing the diligence. And so the point of the summit is to take all the hype out. We have exited founders who are talking about how they structured their exits or how they wish they structured their exits, because not every exit is sexy or life-changing. So those are the conversations, right? It's taking away the job titles, taking away the companies you work for, and saying, you know what, each of us here in this room have unlocked something in our lives. Let's come together to share that. And so we matchmake people, Breen. We have people saying, I'm caring for aging parents. I can share about that. Or I've gone through divorce. I can share about that. And when you take women together and you make them both the wisdom keepers as well as the students, magic happens.
Well, it sounds amazing, and I'm sure that it will be. Just thinking about many things that you said, and I totally just lost my train of thought, but it's such a good last question for you. Now I got sucked into your point, and then it
was a good point. It was a good point.
I know. I don't know if it's coming back. So, but that's okay. Because all of this is important, and there's just so much value in having this conversation, and now I do remember what it is.
Yes.
That's what I was going to say. Okay, so you were making this point about investing in actual live businesses that are producing value. Yeah. And of course, I can't help but want to pause and double click on that, because that is very tight parallel with what we're doing in Fourth Effect, which is helping people recognize, helping them identify, okay, how can I kind of transform my corporate identity or my 20 years of corporate experience or this expertise that I have, this network I have, and turn that into something that will directly take a scaling business and move it a couple of points up the board. Because that ROI that you see when you are investing yourself as an advisor, it is very similar to investing with money. And a lot of times it happens together, because you can write the check, like to your point, you can invest, especially where you're able to ensure a better return on your own investment. They're very closely connected, and I do think that the people that have been very active in capitalism, which have been men, I think that they do know this, and I think that we are catching up. That these things are connected. So we are investing our sweat equity, we're investing our money, and we should be doing that, and we're not doing that. We haven't connected those dots. But
we haven't, and what's powerful is when we come together and it's not some marketing to us, but we're talking to each other, we can go, oh, I know a company that could really use you, right? Or here's another company who's fundraising. You know, I mean, the amount of like forwarding emails that has to happen when really it's like, just join the fourth effect and you'll get all the, get all the access. But, when it comes to how we share the information and pull each other forward, right? It's like we literally have to hold hands because no one else is going to do it for us. These opportunities, these silos, I mean, far too long we've been in a world where we were operating in silos. We didn't share information. Someone asked me the other night, well, how do you start having these conversations? I said, I was on the phone with someone the other week. She was starting a podcast. I said, here's how much I'm paying for these people. Here are my resources. And she's like, wow, I would have always wanted to ask you that, but I never would have. And I said, well, my expectation is if you get a better deal, if you find someone that's more productive, that we're gonna share. Like, this isn't about let me share with you only. This is like, let us hook each other up here for the betterment of the things that we want to create. And so even small adjustments like that, right? Being more forthcoming with information is so valuable because in doing so, we set an example. And every single woman in here is an example setter. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here wanting to have the conversation.
Okay, so we cannot end this conversation without me bringing up my favorite topic, AI. So we have to talk about that because everything you're saying, then AI is this just massive, it's going to transform everything, it's going to change everything, it is already starting. So how does that play into what you're talking about?
Oh yeah, well what's interesting is I've seen so in many ways, I'll start with, I've had a number of opportunities to invest in many of these big AI companies, and my internal gut was like, these prices are too high, like the market's going to adjust on these companies. I could be totally wrong, so we're going to see as things start to shake out. But from an investor standpoint, I'm like, man, we need to really see sort of the cost of computing and sort of how we are actually doing things adjust to a place where I think it's maybe a little bit more of a better deal. So from the investing side, I'm like, okay, maybe a super big mistake, or maybe I was really smart, we don't know. But the thing that I'm actually really concerned about is not really AI, it's really labor, right? If we were to think about the labor market, right? If we were to think about potentially 400,000 people in the government being laid off, right? If we were to think about the jobs that maybe AI can do more efficiently, I'm less concerned about, I'm like, is there a protest happening? Like, I'm like, yeah, they're protesting us,
Or they're cheering.
Yeah. But the protest is fun,
There's a lot of people on bicycles.
But I'm actually concerned about labor and how it is that we start to think about what the future of that looks like. I think AI is incredible. I love using it. I find it to be an incredible assist. It's never the brain, it's always the helper. And so for that, I am grateful. But my heart really speaks to how do we as humans start to re-identify with who we actually are now that the things that we've been told to identify with, i.e. our jobs, right, are no longer things that are certain, right? So there's a different sort of existential crisis that I think we are coming up against.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I'm sure that is true. And I guess I was thinking about it more about the ability of AI to help us learn better, faster, maybe connect deeper or in different ways. Thinking about like
Totally.
how can we close this gap that we have right now when it comes to education and agency and all the rest.
It's so, what's interesting about that is our 10-year-old the other day sat us down and said, hey, like, I want to get ChatGPT. And I had to sit him down and I said, look, Harry, you are a really smart child. And I have no doubt that you're going to build and do incredible things with technology, right? So smart, so bright. And I said, all of your friends right now who are using ChatGPT are farming out critical thinking skills. And at this really special age in your life, you're actually discerning what feels right to you. You're discerning what your values are, what's important to you. You're learning what right and wrong is. And I said, the moment the internet goes out and those kids, your peers, don't have ChatGPT, they're going to be really dumb.
That's true.
And you know what he said to us after? He goes, you know what? I don't think I want that right now.
Oh, wow.
So that was like a real, that was a real W on that side. But you know, when it comes to things like, you know, closing the gap in how we learn things, optimizing financial products, I mean, AI for sure is fast tracking all of us today with what our agency and what we have availability to do things faster, smarter, and we would be remiss not to be really tied into the productivity side of this and to be able to fast track. But critical thinking, it can't do for us, right? It can't tell us what our morals are, can't tell us what our values are, right? If we can train our AI assistants to have and embody our morals and values, then maybe, right, there can be less of a assist and more of a half brain. But for now, I think it's kind of a half brain.
Well, fair enough. And amazing, thank you for all of this, and I would love to.
Thank you both. This has been such an inspiring conversation. I personally have learned so much. This makes me think so widely about, you know, women and helping one another. It is a really volatile time, and so I feel like incumbent that I must say, you know, volatility creates a huge amount of opportunity. As women, we tend to be more careful. I hesitate to not point out that that is the wrong move, right? When there's volatility, when there's drop, when there's risk, that is the time where you make money. And so, you know, there is $1 trillion of commercial real estate. That's my space, so I think about it. I'm in distressed commercial real estate. There's a huge amount of distressed commercial real estate looming. So we're looking for ways to take advantage of that. But there is like opportunity everywhere. So if you are thinking about investing, you can't wait for the recovery until you miss it.
That's such a good point.
So I just want to say, like, as women, take advantage now. Volatility creates opportunity, and share, and just the idea of the fact that we don't naturally feel comfortable talking and sharing and telling about like what we do and how we invest money, but like that really is what men do, right? They share their stock tips and they share their goodbyes. So like, you know, I look forward to hearing from you guys, your best ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think tonight that would be wonderful. You know, we've all had a little bit of wine, hopefully ate a little bit. But you know, tonight let's ask each other like, what's cool that we're looking at, you know, or what's something that you did that was exciting, or what is something that, you know, the number of times I tell someone like, hey, how many people have invested and lost money? And I raise my hand. And yeah, I mean, like, you know, like this is a great opportunity to share. And as we wind things down, I'll mention that, you know, the Wealth Catalyst Summit is happening May 13th. It's happening at the MasterCard Tech Hub on 20th and 5th. It'll be a full day of spectacular speakers and peer-to-peer matchmaking. There's information everywhere around here. But I'm grateful to all of you guys tonight for being here, being open-hearted, open-minded, and really thinking about the future of the world you want to create through the lens of your capital. So thank you.
Thank you all.